an die Sache geht. Und das ist deshalb ein Grundpotenzial, was wir nutzen von den Künstlern, um eben diese Stadt der Moderne zu einer nachhaltigen Stadt der Nachbarschaft und der Zukunft zu bringen. Vielen Dank.
Wir sehen uns gleich nochmal. Vielen Dank erstmal. Super.
Achso, das ist eins.
Ja, jetzt, now it's, I switch to English. And the question is if our next speaker, Parag Khanna, is on the line. Ah, hello Parag.
Ich bin da,
Cool.
keine Sorge, ich bin da.
Cool. Yeah, welcome. We make a big jump from the debates of Kreuzberg and Neuperlach. I don't know if you have seen anything, probably not, because it's a little bit difficult with the cameras. But welcome to you. And we jump now to the global conditions for urban living and their embeddedness. And I think hardly anyone will be able to provide insights into these transformations as you. Parag Khanna is a global strategy consultant, a political scientist, and a best-selling author. Many of you will have heard about his books. The latest, Move, which was on the Spiegel bestseller list, is a critical perspective on global migration movements. And he earned a doctorate at the London School of Economics, but he was, I think, also for some time teaching in Berlin. He actually runs the consulting agency Future Maps in Singapore, and he is perhaps not at last a world traveler. And I have learned that you have already visited and commented and so on 150 countries. Wow. Parag lives in Shanghai. This means, and this is really courageous and a wonderful commitment on his part, that he is now sitting in his office at 1 p.m. So let's start immediately in your presentation. I think at this time, yeah, welcome.
Thank you so very much, Kai. Thank you. Und darüber hinaus bin ich kurze Zeit Schüler in Deutschland gewesen. But today I'll present in English. Thank you so much. I did see the previous presentation, and I just want to also share my congratulations. I do get to visit smart city projects and urban regeneration projects around the world, and I really do feel that the human centricity of these efforts in Germany really is above and beyond what I see in other countries. And I think that's very consistent with the political and social character of German social democracy today. So I'm very, very proud of this, and I support it very strongly. And so congratulations on all of the success and all the efforts that all of you are making. And I'm honored, of course, to join this. I would have loved to be there in person. I'm actually in San Francisco at the moment, not in Singapore, but that is neither here nor there. Let's focus on the global picture and take a step back. And I want to focus my comments today on two very big themes: climate and demographics at a global scale, and think about how that's going to affect the urban environment and the policies that we need to think about to adapt to these two big new conditions that are different really from the past. Again, climate and demographics. Let me start by pointing out that we are in a time of great turbulence. Everyone knows that. But what we need to understand better is that there is a linkage among the crises of today, the crises of the moment. COVID, climate change, geopolitics, social unrest, political polarization, supply chain disruptions. All of these are happening at the same time. We do not get to address them or tackle them in a neat and orderly sequence. We have to grapple with all of them for all of the complexity that they represent. We know that COVID has accelerated certain, obviously, is linked to supply chain disruptions. The supply chain disruptions are heightening inequality and social unrest. The political polarization is already very bad in some countries, and so on. And climate change does not stop. So again, as I say, you do not get to pick your crisis, and we have to act with a certain element of foresight. What would be appropriate responses to all of these things at the same time, not one by one by one, because reality is in fact very, very complex. Now let me focus on the first major topic of climate change. This is a map of the present distribution of the world population. So all 8 billion people in the world today are a pixel this map, including all of you, including me, every. Now, what is unprecedented about the world that we are heading into is the acceleration of climate change in terms of the consequences of rising greenhouse gas emissions and what they mean for temperatures, for sea levels, and for other conditions. So if you look very closely at this map, I am animating the impact of what is called on the suitability of locations for human habitation. So it's literally called the suitability index. And a zone that is colored red means that it is becoming decreasingly suitable for human habitation because temperatures are rising or green areas are becoming more suitable relative to their previous conditions. So, for example, as you have seen, Russia has become one of the world's largest wheat producers and exporters. That's only in the last 10 to 15 years. That was certainly not true before. You may have seen the news about the heat waves in South Asia that are afflicting India and Pakistan right now. If you look at the Indian subcontinent, as it's known on the map here, it's mostly colored red. This is the most populous zone of the planet Earth, right? India alone has as many people as China. And if you add on just two countries, Pakistan and Bangladesh, it's far more people in this zone than all of China. But whereas China is not completely red, India and Pakistan are almost completely red. And the heat waves that they're already experiencing are a map that looks like this, not a map that you have to wait for until temperatures rise 2 degrees Celsius or 3 degrees Celsius, already today. And the irony, you might say, and the very perverse irony of this map is that the majority of the people in the world live in areas that are turning red, whereas the societies of the OECD countries, the wealthy countries, the northern countries, Western societies, the United States, Canada, Europe, as well as Northeast Asian countries like Korea and Japan, what is it that all of our societies have in common demographically? It's that we're depopulating. We are losing population in terms of the indigenous population, the native born population. If not for immigration, our societies would be shrinking. So this is particularly ironic that we are heading into a world where young people are effectively trapped, as it were, in zones that are decreasingly livable, whereas the populations of places that are increasingly suitable for human life are depopulating. This is the world as it is today. This is the world that we are moving into. And this is a situation for which there is not a strategic roadmap. There is not a solution that we can borrow or take from the United Nations or from the IPCC or COP26 or from Joe Biden or Olaf Scholz. There is not a solution that we have thought of yet to this. This is up to all of us. This is about how we redesign the relationship between the human geography of where people are, the natural geography of resources and habitats, the political geography of borders, and the economic geography of infrastructure and supply chains. Those layers of geography are out of sync. They're out of whack. they do not align correctly. And it is our mission, all of us, to realign those geographies and think about where people need to be in the future. And that is the difference between mitigation and adaptation. Now, the governments of the world are meeting in these summits in Paris and in Copenhagen and so on and so forth. The COP26 process is increasingly ambitious around everything that you see on the left table here: mitigation. How do you decrease the intensity, the carbon intensity of our economies, of our industry, of our supply chains? How do we produce more renewable energy and so forth? All of these efforts are underway, and they are receiving billions of dollars of annual commitments, even more than that. But however, that is more than 90% of the total climate related funding that is being committed by governments and companies. Everything that you see on the right, adaptation, is receiving about 5% of the total commitments that are being made right now. But adaptation is how we survive. Adaptation is how we cope with and respond to some of the inevitable realities of climate change. So, how do we climate proof our geography? How do we undertake land reforms? How do we manage disasters? How do we reinforce coastal areas? How do we reduce the urban heat island effects? You've given some examples already. How do we plant more trees? How do we use less cement? How do we have less porosity of urban surfaces? How do we enable more shade? How do we have less cars in downtown areas? How do we retrofit our buildings? All of these things are essential adaptation investments, and they do not get enough political investment. They do not get enough financial investment, and yet they are necessary no matter how aggressively we pursue the mitigation agenda. And the final piece of adaptation is migration. It is resettlement. As I showed you on the previous map, that is going to be necessary. It is necessary. Today in the world, there are as many people who have been dislocated and displaced due to climate phenomena as there are people who have been dislocated or displaced from political violence. That includes Syria, that includes Ukraine, that includes Venezuela, and so forth. So we have to take seriously the idea that populations will move, and our urban centers, our cities, wherever they are going to have to absorb them. Now, you know this already because in Germany, Germany is the front lines of taking migrants from the political conflicts in the Middle East and from Ukraine, as well as from other Arab countries in West Asia, as well as, of course, North Africa and so forth. So imagine that accelerating, but needing a real strategy for it. Now, in Europe and in America, actually, one of the responses that I see the next generation taking, younger people, is that they don't want to be wedded or attached to any one place. They know that home ownership is too expensive, and they don't know where the next job will be, and they're very concerned about climate change. So one of the things that I saw happen during COVID is that Americans began to buy more and more trailer homes. These are called RVs, recreational vehicles. And it really challenges the notion of what used to be called the American dream, which means having a home, buying a house, and getting a college degree. Well, today, for young people in America, and this is also true to some degree in Europe, the dream is not that, because that may seem impossible. It may seem out of reach. Instead, it's about mobility and skills, learning things vocationally, professionally, that are relevant wherever you may be, and being mobile so that you can go to where the opportunity is, where you can be useful, where you can feel safe, where you find community. And so a lot of people have been, buying or renting these become quite common. And the kind of traditional paradigm around demographic attitudes and mentality, as if the world is still a collection of, you might say, baby boomers or older Generation X. But we have to remember that demographics, now let me get to the second major point, is another very big shift that we are experiencing in the world today next to climate. We are all accustomed to a world where the population has increased from the year 1920 to 2020 by 4x. The world population has quadrupled in the last 100 years. But that has stopped. That has stopped. The world population is reaching a plateau, and it will probably cross 9 billion people eventually, but probably will not reach 10 billion people, which is much less than. And most of the world's population is actually young, not old. Our societies, like Germany or France or America, are aging rapidly. So you have a growing percentage of the population that's old. But the majority of the world population is actually still young. It's below the age of 40. So that means that millennials and Generation Z and Generation Alpha, the babies, today's babies, together still represent more than 50% of the world population. But what is different about now and the future is that because fertility rates are so low, each generation will not be bigger than the previous generation, actually. You can see that on this chart here. It could be that because of the baby bust, the low fertility that has been happening in our societies for the last couple of decades, the impact of the financial crisis of 2008, and now COVID, which has been a very devastating baby bust. It's not only been an enormous and tragic loss of life, it's also actually meant a significant drag on fertility, which means that this dashed line that you see here, Generation Alpha may be smaller than Generation Z. So the cohort of today's teenagers, Generation Z, is actually the largest group of human beings in the world and the largest generation that we as a species will ever produce. And our generations will get smaller. And that has significant implications, of course, for our infrastructure investment, for our macroeconomics, for our tax policy, for our pensions, for our labor markets, for our immigration policy, and of course, for our cities. How people live, where they live, what space is available, what do we do with vacant land, what do we do about affordable housing. These things, these models have been fiscally and financially built on certain assumptions around demographic growth that are actually changing. And we have to take these into account as well. But the bottom line here, ethically, is that we have to treasure today's youth. We have to redesign the world around the needs, the economic, the housing, the environmental needs of today's millennials and Generation Z and Generation Alpha. They are literally the future, of course. They are our planet's demographic future, and the future of our species depends on those generations having a certain comfort level, a certain stability, environmental stability, as well as economic stability, in order to feel that we can keep a stable population. And right now, of course, they have very, very significant concerns. So let me double down on that. Let me really emphasize how significant the differences are between today's young generations and previous generations. We very often speak in our aging societies as if we, certain voices with certain experience, certain life trajectories, as if our points of view represent that of the world population. For example, we speak in a privileged way if you're Generation X or a baby boomer, that you may be married, you have a family, a two-income household, you have two children, you live in a suburban area in a Western society. But if you take the 8 billion people of the world and you look for the median human being, that person does not fit this archetype of traditional generalization about about human society. In fact, that median person in the world today is young, not old. That person is unmarried. That person does not have children. That person is not financially secure. That person does not own a home. Instead, they're renting at best. And they don't live in the West, of course. They live in developing countries, very often in megacities. And so there's a really strong difference between what we think of when we try to speak on behalf of humanity versus who the voices that actually represent the present and the future world population. And I want to say this is a set of commentaries about the world, but this is why I actually believe that European youth in particular are so incredibly progressive in terms of their political agenda, because they are the ones who are speaking about these challenges that they face every day very, very vocally. And again, it's an area where Europe really does lead in terms of progressive attitudes. But of course, it has to be matched with a lot of actions. And some of the psychological differences, of course, are that young people are not as loyal to national identity, to a vertical identity. Whether it is ethnic or political. Rather, they are much more thinking horizontally about identity, thinking about the common causes of gender rights, environmental sustainability, and so forth. In fact, we have many surveys of millennials all over the world. We also have a lot of data taken from looking at Facebook and Twitter and so forth. And it shows that young people around the world, whether they are German or Chinese or Canadian or Brazilian or African, their core values are the right to connectivity, the right to sustainability, the right to mobility. And as I said, we have to redesign our systems around those values. Those are the right values, if you will, in my opinion. And then the question becomes then demographically, in this world of significant imbalances between old and young, north and south, stable and unstable, what will the winning societies of the future look like? And to me, the societies of the future that succeed under these demographic conditions will be those that are attracting young people. A successful society must attract young people and do the things that attract young people with opportunity, with skills, with work-life balance, with fairness and equity in societies. And that's I think the race to be the winner of the war for young talent. Now, we have a vast planet that is increasingly at stress, but if you take the continents of the world together, there are 150 million square kilometers of land area. The planet is habitable. There are only 8 billion people and soon 9 billion people. We can all fit in this world very comfortably. We can feed everyone. We can house everyone. There is space for everyone. There is resource stress, but there is also resource abundance. We have the challenge of distribution as much as we have the challenge of scarcity. And so what I do in my work is look at what will be the geography of the future urban centers, the livable habitats, the places that should be thinking about how to attract young people, how to diversify economies, how to pre-design our infrastructure, our cities to be the right kind of habitats for young people. And that space is everywhere, whether it's young people or old people. That there are plenty of geographies. I highlight some of them on this map, the places that I think of that could become new civilizational centers, places of high growth. And you can see, of course, Europe is relatively sort of adaptable to the new climate realities. The latitude of Europe is further north than much of the United States. So you can see what's happening in the southern United States with the droughts and the heat waves there. And places like Canada, Eastern Europe, and other places are becoming more livable. And we need to think about the geographies where the people of the future are going to settle. So,
Parag,
a lot of things
do
have
you
already
hear
been
me?
mentioned in your conversation. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I do.
Because unfortunately, we are already at the end of your presentation. And so I, I don't want, can you perhaps Oh, that was very impolite. I didn't know that
Muss man
because
nur ein bisschen schneller weiterspringen.
there's a big applause for you.
Thank you.
So I think you can't hear the audience, but the audience is full, and
I can.
there was an applause to your presentation and the overview you gave. And unfortunately, we cannot integrate you here in the debate. But nevertheless, I want to ask you one question. You spoke about the youth values, and you mentioned at one side connectivity, sustainability, and mobility. That will say that these generations, they are used to be really mobile, or we can also say they are obliged to be mobile. But on the other side, you said that there is an increasing need for healthcare and for stability among citizens. So my question is, how can cities translate these kind of antagonistic desires into guiding principles for their city planning? Is there an easy answer?
Is in the generational values or the clash of generational values. We see structural transformation, whereas older generations of voters want to see more investments in pensions and healthcare services and so forth. And in truth, we have to do all of those things because we have a large cohort, a large generation of aging people, as well as a lot of young people. So whereas in electoral politics, we see this tension that you're describing, the reality is that in democratic societies, we have to satisfy both constituencies, old and young, and that's why we have to focus on doing this more efficiently, more cost effectively. And there aren't silver bullets, of course, but there's good examples of how to make housing more affordable, how to rezone housing so that young people can have more access to it. And again, I think that some of this is happening in Germany, but it's not happening fast enough all over the world in the places where young populations are rising and where large numbers of migrants are coming in.
So we are coming at the end to the housing problem at one of the main obligations for the future. And Parag, I want to really thank you for this overview of a lot of aspects we are here treating at our conference, really in only a small part of the 15 minutes. And a big applause for you, and thank you.
Thank you. Vielen Dank. Wiederhören.
It works. Okay, so ja, ich komme jetzt, ich switche zurück ins Deutsche und darf jetzt nochmal unsere 4 Vorrednerinnen auf die Bühne bitten.